Human remains have been found in the most unimaginable places: abandoned mines, concrete foundations of buildings, and at the bottom of lakes. But the story that unfolded in the swampy forests of South Carolina made even experienced criminologists question the limits of what is possible. It began with an ordinary disappearance and ended with a discovery that shattered all notions of what happens to the human body after death. This is the story of how a river, which had kept its secrets for 5 years, revealed only a small but terrifying part of the truth hidden inside one of its most ancient inhabitants. This story begins not with a discovery, but with a disappearance. On Saturday, July 17, 2004, 26-year-old Lauren Mills, a graduate student in biology at the College of Charleston, left her apartment on King Street. Her destination was a solo day trip to Congaree National Park, located about 100 miles northwest of Charleston. Lauren specialized in the study of old-growth floodplain forest ecosystems, and Congaree Park, with its unique relic trees and complex hydrological system, was of significant interest to her research. She planned to spend no more than 6 or 7 hours in the park, collect some plant samples, take a few photos for her dissertation, and return to the city before dark. The weather that day was typical for South Carolina in midsummer. The air temperature was approaching 35 degrees Celsius, humidity was high, and weather services warned of possible brief thunderstorms in the afternoon. The last person to speak to Lauren in person was her roommate, 25-year-old Jessica Riley. According to her, Lauren left the house at approximately 7:30 a.m. She was wearing dark, thick hiking pants, high-top hiking boots, and carrying a small, dark blue backpack. She was wearing a bright red synthetic windbreaker to protect her from the wind and rain. Jessica Riley recalled that Lauren was in a good mood and described her plan in detail. Drive to the park, leave the car in the parking lot at the Harry Hampton Visitor Center, walk part of the Weston Lake Loop Trail, which was a circular trail about 7.5 kilometers long, and return to the car no later than 6 o'clock in the evening. She took a standard short hike kit with her: a liter bottle of water, several energy bars, a camera, a small notebook, airtight bags for collecting samples, and a set of car keys. She left her cell phone at home, knowing that most of Congaree National Park had no cell phone reception. Her car, a blue 1988 Honda Civic sedan, was fully fueled and in good working order. At approximately 9:15 a.m. that same day, a park ranger named David Chen, while making his routine rounds, noticed a blue Honda Civic in the visitor center parking lot. He did not see the driver, but noted that the car was parked neatly and did not appear suspicious. Congaree National Park is one of the most extensive remaining floodplain forests in North America. Its landscape is characterized by dense thickets, swampy areas, and numerous creeks and streams that flow into the Congaree River, which runs along the southern border of the park. The river is known for its slow current, muddy bottom, and large population of large freshwater fish, including giant flathead catfish, which can weigh more than 50 kilograms. The park's terrain is challenging to navigate, especially after rain, when water levels rise and many sections of the trails become flooded. The park's wildlife includes alligators, wild boars, and poisonous snakes, requiring visitors to remain alert and exercise caution at all times. Lauren Mills was an experienced hiker and had visited similar places many times, so her family and colleagues were confident in her preparation and ability to assess risks. She knew the rules of conduct in the wilderness and had never deviated from her planned routes before. She was expected to return to Charleston no later than 8 or 9 o'clock in the evening. No one has seen Lauren Mills alive since. On the evening of July 17, 2004, Jessica Riley was going about her usual business in her apartment on King Street in Charleston. She was expecting Lauren Mills to return around 8 p.m., as they had agreed. When 9 o'clock rolled around and Lauren hadn't shown up or gotten in touch, Jessica wasn't too worried, thinking her neighbor might be hanging out at the park or stopped somewhere on her way home. But by 10 o'clock, the lack of any news started to make her uneasy. At 11 p.m., Jessica Riley began calling their mutual friends and acquaintances. Still, none of them had seen or spoken to Lauren during the day. An attempt to call Lauren's cell phone was unsuccessful. The phone, left in the apartment, rang in the next room. Realizing that more than 5 hours had passed since Lauren was supposed to return from the park, Jessica decided to contact law enforcement. At 12:17 a.m. on July 18th, she called the Charleston Police Department and reported a missing person. The emergency operator took the information and determined that the incident most likely occurred in Congaree National Park, which is under the jurisdiction of the Richland County Sheriff's Office and the United States National Park Service. The information was immediately forwarded to the appropriate county. At 2:34 a.m., Richland County Sheriff's Deputy Mark Jenkins was dispatched to the main entrance of Congaree National Park to check for the missing person's vehicle. Arriving at the scene at approximately 3 a.m., Officer Jenkins discovered a blue Honda Civic sedan in the nearly empty parking lot of the visitor center with a license plate number that matched the one reported in the missing person report. The vehicle was locked, and an external inspection revealed no signs of forced entry or struggle. Inside, on the passenger seat, was a park map. The presence of the car in the parking lot confirmed the initial fears. Lauren Mills had entered the park but had not returned. From that moment on, a full-scale search and rescue operation was launched. At dawn on Sunday, July 18th, a mobile command center was set up in the park. The operation involved National Park Service employees, Richland County officers, and search teams from the South Carolina Department of Emergency Services. The Weston Lake Loop Trail and the surrounding area within a 500-meter radius were designated as the primary search area. Search teams consisting of 5 to 6 people began a methodical combing of the area. Search conditions were challenging. The aftermath of the thunderstorm that had passed the day before made the ground sticky and slippery. Any possible traces on the trail had been thoroughly washed away by the water. Thick undergrowth and low-hanging tree branches limited visibility to a few meters, forcing searchers to move very slowly. The humidity, close to 100%, and high temperatures put additional strain on the participants in the operation. By the end of the first day of the search, absolutely no clues had been found. No fragments of clothing, no abandoned equipment, no traces indicating that Lauren could have left the trail. The next day, July 19th, canine units with specially trained search dogs were brought in to assist in the operation. However, their work was also hampered. High water levels in the marshy lowlands and the many intersecting scents of wild animals prevented the dogs from picking up a steady trail. At the same time as the ground search, a water team was deployed. Rescuers in flat-bottom boats and kayaks began patrolling Cedar Creek and the Congaree River shoreline where the trail ran close to the water. They searched backwaters, log jams, and dense riparian vegetation, but these efforts were also unsuccessful. Over the next 3 days, the search area was constantly expanded. Helicopters were used to survey the area from the air, but the dense forest canopy made observation difficult. By noon on July 21st, the active phase of the search and rescue operation was nearing completion. More than 100 people had searched dozens of square kilometers of rugged terrain. Still, they found no physical evidence that could shed light on the fate of Lauren Mills. She had disappeared without a trace. A week after Lauren Mills's disappearance on July 24, 2004, the search operation leadership decided to end the active phase of the search. The large-scale search involving dozens of people and special equipment was called off. The official position was that all reasonable and available measures to search the park had been exhausted. The case was finally transferred from the search and rescue category to a criminal investigation into the disappearance of a person. The case was assigned to Detective Robert Peterson of the Richland County Sheriff's Office, an experienced officer specializing in missing persons cases. From that point on, the primary focus shifted from a physical search of the park to investigating Lauren Mills's identity and the circumstances leading up to her disappearance. Detective Peterson and his team began by systematically working through all possible scenarios. The main and most likely scenario was considered to be an accident in the park. Several scenarios were considered: a fall followed by an injury incompatible with independent movement, a venomous snake bite resulting in rapid loss of consciousness, an alligator attack near one of the ponds, or drowning in the Congaree River or Cedar Creek. However, each of these hypotheses faced a central contradiction: the complete absence of any material evidence. Search teams found no traces of blood, no pieces of clothing, and no abandoned backpack. Experts noted that even in the case of a predator attack, certain clues usually remain at the scene. The absence of a body was also unusual. The current in the Congaree River is not strong enough to carry a body many kilometers in a short period, and it would most likely have been discovered by water patrols. At the same time, the investigators looked into the possibility of a violent crime. They checked the park's visitor log for July 17th and talked to staff and a few tourists who were there that day. No one could remember a lone girl in a red jacket, and no one reported any suspicious individuals or incidents. Detectives understood that the park had many unofficial entry points, and it was impossible to track down everyone who could have been there that day. The investigation then focused on Lauren Mills' personal life. Her neighbor, Jessica Riley, her parents, who lived in Georgia, her brother, and her friends, classmates, and teachers from the College of Charleston were questioned again in more detail. All those questioned described Lauren as a well-adjusted, determined, and non-confrontational person. She had no known enemies, was not involved in any questionable relationships, and had no financial problems. An analysis of her bank accounts revealed no unusual transactions. A search of her personal belongings and computer in her apartment yielded no clues indicating that she might have been planning to run away or meet someone in the park. The theory that she had disappeared voluntarily was almost immediately ruled out as inconsistent with her personality and life circumstances. Weeks passed, then months. No new information came to light. The Mills family, dissatisfied with the results of the official investigation, hired a private detective and organized several searches with the help of volunteers. But these attempts were also fruitless. Public interest in the case gradually faded, and news reports ceased. By December 2004, 5 months after her disappearance, the Lauren Mills case was classified as unsolved, a so-called cold case. The investigation file, containing reports on the fruitless search, interrogation transcripts, and analytical reports, was sent to the archives. For law enforcement and the public, Lauren Mills became just another statistic in a long list of people who had disappeared under mysterious circumstances. The hope that her fate would ever be determined was virtually gone. Congaree National Park had swallowed her up, leaving no trace behind, and it seemed that its swampy marshes and dark waters would keep this secret forever. Years passed. 2005 turned into 2006, then 2007. Every year, on July 17th, the Mills family published a small ad in the local newspapers with a photo of Lauren and a request for anyone with any information to contact the police. These appeals went unanswered. At the Richland County Sheriff's Office, the Lauren Mills case, like dozens of other unsolved cases, sat in a cardboard box in the archives. New detectives who joined the department would occasionally review it. Still, with no new leads, witnesses, or evidence, it didn't make sense to reopen the investigation. In Congaree National Park, life went on as usual. Seasons came and went, and the river flooded in the spring. It receded by the end of summer, and thousands of tourists walked the same trails, unaware of the events of 5 years ago. The name Lauren Mills gradually disappeared from the news and remained only in the memories of her loved ones and on the pages of an archived police report. The mystery of her disappearance seemed unsolvable, buried under a layer of time and river silt. On Wednesday, August 12, 2009, 58-year-old Douglas Harris, a retiree from the small town of Gadsden, located a few kilometers from the park, launched his small aluminum boat. Harris was an avid fisherman and had known the Congaree River since childhood. He fished there several times a month, preferring secluded spots away from popular tourist routes. That day, his goal was to catch catfish. He steered his boat downstream, several kilometers south of the part of the park where the Weston Lake Loop Trail ran. He chose a spot known to local fishermen as Catfish Hole, a deep, slow-moving pool where the riverbed was littered with submerged trees and snags, creating the perfect habitat for large bottom-dwelling predators. The weather was hot and windless, and the surface of the water seemed motionless. Harris used a heavy rod equipped with a powerful multiplier reel with braided line capable of withstanding a load of over 100 pounds. He used pieces of freshly caught bream as bait. Around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, after several hours of fruitless waiting, the float on one of his rods suddenly went under the water. The ensuing jerk was so powerful that the rod bent into an arc, almost breaking out of the holder. Harris immediately realized that he had hooked a specimen of exceptional size. A struggle ensued that lasted more than 30 minutes. The fish did not give up, diving deep and forcing the reel to let out line with a screech. Douglas Harris, who had considerable experience, acted patiently, gradually tiring his underwater opponent. Finally, he managed to bring the giant fish to the surface of the water near the boat. It was a flathead catfish, one of the largest he had ever seen. Its length from whiskers to tail was almost 1.5 meters. With great difficulty, using a special gaff, Harris pulled the fish into the boat. Weighing it on a portable scale, he found that the catfish weighed about 110 pounds, which was almost 50 kilograms. It was the catch of his life. Satisfied with his catch, Douglas Harris started the motor and headed for shore. He brought the fish home, planning to cut it up that evening and share some of the catch with his neighbors. He had no idea that his lucky fishing trip would be the key to solving a 5-year-old mystery, and that the darkest secret of the Congaree River lay not at its bottom, but inside the giant fish he had caught. On the evening of August 12, 2009, Douglas Harris and his wife Mary were processing their catch in the backyard of their home. The giant catfish lay on a large wooden table that they used for cutting up fish and game. The process required considerable effort due to the size and weight of the fish. While Douglas prepared his tools and sharpened a long filleting knife, Mary Harris brought buckets of water and plastic bags for waste. As was their usual practice, Mary was responsible for gutting the fish before Douglas began filleting. At around 7 p.m., using a sturdy knife with a short blade, she made a deep longitudinal incision along the belly of the catfish, from the head to the anal fin, to remove the internal organs. Once the incision was made, it became apparent that the contents of the fish's stomach were unusual. In addition to the half-digested remains of other fish and river debris, there was a dense, compressed mass of an unnatural appearance. The first thing that caught Mary's attention was a fragment of bright red fabric, the color of which contrasted sharply with the gray-brown contents of the stomach. Pulling on it, she extracted a piece of material that, despite its prolonged exposure to an aggressive environment, had retained its synthetic structure. Next to it was another, larger piece of fabric, dark blue in color, similar to the material used to make backpacks. Continuing to sort through the contents, she came across a complex, elongated object. Cleaning it of mucus and dirt, she realized with horror that she was holding a bone that, in size and shape, could not have belonged to any animal living in the river. It was a human bone, presumably a femur. At that moment, Douglas Harris stopped what he was doing and came over to look at his wife's find. Together, they carefully removed the objects from the catfish's stomach. Among other things, they found a piece of thick corrugated rubber, similar to the sole of a boot, with the remains of a rotted shoelace. But the last and most important find was a small bundle of 3 keys on a metal ring. One of the keys was unmistakably identified as an old Honda car key. Realizing the seriousness and gruesomeness of their find, Douglas Harris immediately forbade his wife from touching anything else. He went into the house and at 7:43 p.m. called the Richland County Sheriff's Office, telling the dispatcher that they had caught a giant catfish in the Congaree River and found what they believed to be human remains inside it. The dispatcher, following instructions for such cases, ordered Harris not to touch anything at the scene and to wait for the patrol to arrive. 20 minutes later, 2 sheriff's deputies arrived at their home. After examining the find, they confirmed the presence of bones and objects believed to belong to a human being and immediately called an investigation team to the scene. News of the unusual discovery quickly reached the Homicide Division. The detective on duty, having received information about the location of the discovery, the Congaree River, and the items found, fragments of clothing, remains, and keys to a Honda car, initiated a check of the database of unsolved cases. The system almost immediately indicated a match with the case of Lauren Mills, who disappeared in Congaree National Park 5 years ago. The entire fish, along with its contents, was officially seized as evidence. It was carefully placed in a special sealed container and sent under guard to the Richland County Morgue for a detailed forensic examination. The investigation, which had been buried in the archives for 5 long years, was suddenly reopened. On Thursday, August 13, 2009, in the sterile room of the Richland County Forensic Medical Examiner's Office, Chief Medical Examiner Dr. Alistair Finch began examining the evidence seized the day before. On the steel autopsy table in front of him was a sealed container containing the stomach of a flathead catfish and its contents. The work required extreme care and methodical precision. The first step was to carefully separate the organic remains and foreign objects from the biological mass. Using distilled water and special sieves, Dr. Finch and his assistant washed all the contents, separating each solid fragment for subsequent analysis. Each item removed was photographed, described, and placed in a separate labeled container. Upon completion of the cleaning process, a complete list of findings was compiled. It included 1 human femur, right, 3 thoracic vertebrae, a fragment of the right ilium of the pelvis, 2 human rib bones. In addition to the skeletal remains, the following items were cataloged: 1 fragment of red synthetic fabric, approximately 20 by 15 centimeters in size, with traces of stitching. 1 fragment of dark blue dense fabric, presumably nylon, connected to part of a plastic buckle. 1 fragment of a rubber sole with a pronounced tread pattern corresponding to the back of a hiking boot. 1 set of 3 metal keys on a ring, one of which was identified as an ignition key for a Honda car manufactured in the 1990s. A preliminary examination of the skeletal remains allowed Dr. Finch to make some initial conclusions. The structure and shape of the pelvic bone, as well as the metric characteristics of the femoral head, clearly indicated that the remains belonged to a female. The degree of ossification of the epiphyseal plates and the absence of age-related degenerative changes, such as osteoarthritis, allowed the biological age at the time of death to be determined as between 25 and 30 years. This biological profile matched Lauren Mills's data perfectly. For final and legally significant identification, a bone sample was taken from the femur for deoxyribonucleic acid analysis. The sample was sent to the State Forensic Laboratory for comparison with the reference DNA profile obtained from Lauren's parents in 2004. During a detailed osteological examination, Dr. Finch discovered a critical anomaly. One of the 2 rib bones found had a trace of a healed or partially healed fracture. This was not a post-mortem fracture caused by pressure or environmental factors. The nature of the bone callus indicated that the injury was sustained during life or at the moment of death. The fracture line was smooth and showed no signs of multiple fragments, which could be characteristic of a fall. In his preliminary conclusion, the expert noted that this type of injury could have been the result of a single, focused blow with a blunt object. This finding was the first piece of material evidence in 5 years that cast doubt on the accident theory. The DNA analysis results came back 72 hours later and left no room for doubt. The genetic profile extracted from the skeletal remains matched Lauren Mills's genetic profile at 99.9% certainty. On August 5, 2009, Lauren Mills was officially declared dead. Forensic experts also presented a theory explaining the strange circumstances of the discovery. Most likely, after Lauren's death, her body ended up in the water and sank to the bottom of the river. The slow current and low oxygen content in the bottom layer of silt could have slowed down the decomposition process. The flathead catfish, a large bottom-dwelling predator and scavenger, fed on the soft tissues for a long time, swallowing them along with the surrounding bones, as well as fragments of clothing and items found in the pockets. This explained why the remains were found not intact, but in the form of separate, unconnected pieces. The identification of the body was complete, but now the investigation faced a new, much more difficult question. Was Lauren Mills' death an accident, or did the broken rib indicate foul play? After the remains were officially identified, the Richland County Sheriff's Office found itself in a difficult situation. On the one hand, the disappearance case was closed. Still, on the other hand, the circumstances surrounding Lauren Mills's death required a new, full investigation. On August 19, 2009, the county sheriff held an official press conference. He confirmed to reporters that the remains found in the Congaree River did indeed belong to Lauren Mills. He briefly, without going into unnecessary details, outlined the unique circumstances of the discovery, mentioning that they had been found by a local fisherman inside a catfish he had caught. This detail immediately caused a sensation in the media across the country. The story, dubbed "The Girl in the Catfish" by the press, dominated the headlines for several weeks. The sheriff also officially announced the reopening of the investigation into the circumstances surrounding Lauren Mills' death. However, he deliberately omitted to mention the key finding of the forensic experts: the broken rib. This information was classified and considered an essential piece of evidence known only to a limited number of people. The reopened case was assigned to Detective Robert Peterson, who had led the original investigation in 2004. Over the past 5 years, he had risen to the rank of captain and headed the Cold Case Investigation Unit. For Peterson, this case had become personal. He dug up an old report from the archives containing all the materials from 5 years ago. His team was tasked with reanalyzing all the available information in light of the new data. The first step was to re-interview all the key witnesses. The detectives contacted Jessica Riley, Lauren's former neighbor, who now lived in another state. They spoke again with Lauren's parents and brother, as well as her college friends. The investigators hoped that over the years, people might remember some new details that had previously seemed insignificant. However, time was working against the investigation. People's memories had faded, and no one could add anything significant to the statements they had given 5 years earlier. Now the investigation had two main but completely opposite lines of inquiry. The first theory was that it was an accident. According to this version, Lauren Mills could have slipped on a wet rock or tree root at the water's edge. When she fell, she could have hit her chest on a hard object, such as a submerged snag, which led to a broken rib. The impact could have caused temporary loss of consciousness or pain shock, causing her to fall into the water and drown. This version explained both the injury and how her body ended up in the river. It was simple, logical, and did not require a search for a perpetrator. However, it had its weaknesses. Dr. Finch noted in his report that the nature of the fracture was more consistent with a focused blow than with the distributed impact of a fall. In addition, Lauren's family and friends insisted that she was an extremely cautious person and would never have gone near the water in a wild, swampy area, knowing the risk of encountering alligators. The second theory was murder. This version was based on the broken rib as the main piece of evidence. According to this scenario, Lauren encountered an unknown man on the trail. A conflict may have arisen between them, which escalated into physical violence. The attacker struck her in the chest with a blunt object and then, to cover up the crime, dumped her body in the Congaree River. This version explained both the injury and the family's skepticism about Lauren's carelessness. It also demonstrated the complete absence of traces on the trail. The perpetrator could have deliberately disposed of the body by drowning it. The primary and insurmountable obstacle to this theory was the complete lack of motive and suspects. A review of Lauren's personal life 5 years ago revealed absolutely nothing that could indicate she had any enemies or stalkers. If it was murder, it was most likely the result of a chance encounter with an unstable or aggressive person in a secluded part of the park. Solving such a crime 5 years later, with no witnesses or other clues except for a single broken bone, seemed an impossible task. The investigation reached a dead end. New clues did not clarify the picture. Still, they only complicated it, leaving behind only 2 mutually exclusive scenarios for the tragedy. Over the next few months, from September to December 2009, Detective Peterson's team undertook a final series of active investigative measures. The group of investigators, together with a forensic expert and a park ranger, returned to the scene of the crime. Their task was not to find new evidence. After 5 years, that was pointless, but to conduct a topographical and situational analysis of the area. They walked the entire Weston Lake Loop, marking on the map the areas where the trail came closest to the water. They recorded all the places where the terrain was challenging: steep descents, slippery rocky areas, and fallen trees. The results of this analysis were disappointing. It turned out that there were at least a dozen places along the trail where someone could have fallen into the water by accident. At the same time, there were also many secluded areas hidden from the main trail that would have been ideal for a surprise attack. Thus, the geography of the park itself supported both mutually exclusive versions equally, making it impossible to give preference to either one. Parallel to the work in the field, analysts at the sheriff's office conducted a large-scale database check. They looked for any connections between the Lauren Mills case and other unsolved crimes or disappearances that had occurred in South Carolina and neighboring states between 2002 and 2006. Particular attention was paid to incidents involving attacks on tourists in national parks and recreational areas. Investigators tried to identify a modus operandi or find references to suspicious individuals who might have been in Congaree in July 2004. This painstaking work, which took several weeks, also yielded no results. The Lauren Mills case remained an isolated incident with no apparent links to other criminal events. The investigation's last hope was another appeal to the public. Although key details of the investigation were kept secret, the police again published Lauren's photo. They asked anyone who might have been in Congaree Park on July 17, 2004, and seen anything unusual to contact them. Several people responded to the appeal, but their statements were either too vague or irrelevant to the case. By early 2010, Detective Peterson was forced to admit that all possible investigative avenues had been exhausted. With no suspects, no clear picture of the crime, and no way to find new evidence, it was pointless to continue the active investigation. The Richland County Coroner's Office put an end to the official part of the story. Based on Dr. Alistair Finch's report, an official death certificate was issued for Lauren Mills. The cause of death was listed as probable drowning. However, in the most critical section, circumstances of death, the coroner's verdict was death under unexplained circumstances. This wording was a legal acknowledgement that the investigation and forensic examination had not been able to establish with sufficient certainty whether Lauren's death was the result of an accident or violent action. The presence of a broken rib was noted in the report. Still, in the absence of other evidence, it could not be unequivocally interpreted as a sign of murder. Upon receiving this conclusion, the sheriff's office officially suspended the investigation. In March 2010, the Lauren Mills case was reclassified as unsolved for the second time and sent to the archives. Despite the shocking discovery that brought Lauren back from oblivion, the mystery of her last hours remains unsolved. The official justice system did everything it could and ultimately admitted its own powerlessness. The official conclusion of death under unclear circumstances brought no satisfaction to Lauren Mills's family. For them, the broken rib was indisputable proof that their daughter had been the victim of violence. After obtaining permission from the authorities, they cremated the remains and held a private memorial service. Through their representative, the Mills family issued a statement to the press in which they thanked law enforcement and Douglas Harris personally, but also expressed their categorical disagreement with the official version. They claimed that the accident theory ignored both the evidence and their daughter's character. This position marked the end of their public involvement in the case. After this statement, they ceased all communication with journalists, remaining alone with their grief and their conviction that Lauren's killer had never been found. For them, the case was not closed, and the lack of justice left a wound open. The events surrounding the disappearance and shocking discovery of Lauren Mills's remains had a long-lasting impact on Congaree National Park and the surrounding communities. The story, which received widespread coverage in the national news, gave the park a reputation as not only a beautiful place, but also a potentially dangerous one. In response to public outcry and an internal review of safety protocols, the National Park Service implemented several new rules in Congaree. Ranger patrols have been significantly increased, especially in remote parts of the park, including the Weston Lake Loop Trail. New information signs with detailed maps and strong recommendations to stay on the trails, carry communication devices if possible, and avoid hiking alone have been posted at all major trailheads. A strict ban on kayaks, canoes, and any other watercraft on the Congaree River within the park at night has also been introduced. In addition to the official changes, the story of Lauren Mills has become part of local folklore. Among fishermen and hunters, the Congaree River and its giant catfish have taken on a sinister tone. The story of how the river kept the body for 5 years and then returned it, most unimaginably, has become a kind of legend, a warning about the dangers lurking in the wild swamps. For criminologists and investigators, the case has become a textbook example of how time and the environment can destroy almost all evidence. The 5-year gap between the disappearance and discovery of the remains made it impossible to use standard investigative techniques. There was no crime scene to examine, no witnesses with fresh memories, and no material evidence other than what was preserved inside the fish. The Lauren Mills case began to be cited in lectures at police academies as an illustration of a perfect dead end, where even the discovery of remains does not bring the investigation any closer to a solution. Douglas Harris himself, the man who unwittingly brought the case back from oblivion, gave his testimony to the police and then diligently avoided the attention of the press, returning to his quiet life as a pensioner. Detective Robert Peterson retired a few years after the case was closed, and according to his colleagues, the Lauren Mills case remained one of the strangest and most unsatisfactory of his career. Time passed, the rules in the park changed, but the main question remained unanswered, lost somewhere between two irreconcilable versions: tragic accident or cold-blooded murder. 10 years have passed since the investigation was reopened, and more than 20 years since Lauren Mills disappeared in the swamps of Congaree National Park. What began as a routine missing tourist case has turned into one of the strangest and most disturbing criminal mysteries in South Carolina history. It has gone through a complete cycle, from obscurity to hope, from a shocking discovery to a disappointing dead end. Every piece of evidence that could be gathered has been gathered. Every test that could be conducted has been conducted. And yet, in the end, there is no complete and definitive truth. There is only a set of indisputable facts that form two completely different stories, and it is impossible to prove which one is true. The first story is one of a tragic accident. In this version, Lauren Mills, absorbed in her work or momentarily distracted, slips on the slippery path at the water's edge. She falls, hitting her chest on a rock or a snag, and breaks a rib. The pain and shock, possibly followed by a brief loss of consciousness, cause her to end up in slow-moving but deep water. Weakened by her injury, she is unable to fight the current and drowns. Her body is carried to the bottom, where it slowly decomposes over 5 years under the influence of natural forces. The river catfish, following its scavenger instincts, does what it has always done. It consumes the food available to it. There is no villain in this story, no malicious intent. There is only nature, indifferent to human fate, and one wrong move that led to fatal consequences. The second story is a tale of human cruelty. In this version, Lauren Mills encounters another person on a secluded trail. It could be anyone, another hiker, a poacher, a random vagrant. A conflict ensues, perhaps an attempted robbery or assault. Lauren resists and is struck hard in the chest. The blow breaks her rib and possibly knocks her unconscious or kills her instantly. To hide his crime, the attacker dumps her body in the river, trusting that the swamps and wilderness will conceal his secret. For 5 years, he has succeeded. In this story, there is a killer who may still be living freely, confident in his impunity. In this story, a broken rib is not an accident, but a clue that screams of a crime, but its voice is not enough to prove it. Today, the Lauren Mills case remains in the Richland County Sheriff's Office's cold case files. Her name stands alongside dozens of others whose fates remain unknown. But her story is unique. It reminds us that sometimes the truth can be brought back from oblivion in the most incredible ways. But even that does not guarantee answers. The Congaree River, which had kept the secret for 5 years, ultimately returned only fragments of it. It gave Lauren her name back and gave her family a grave, but it kept the secret of her last moments in its dark waters. What really happened on that hot July day in 2004 will forever remain there, on the overgrown path by the sleepy, muddy river. It is a story that has returned from the depths but remains incomplete.
And that wraps up today's story. Now we want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments, and let's see how far these stories reach. If this story moved you or gave you chills, give it a like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. One last thing, rate the story from 1 to 10 in the comments. Your feedback helps us bring you even better ones next time. Thanks for watching. We appreciate you being part of this storytelling journey.